Hi, good day everyone. I'm Kashmir here. I'll be continuing our presentation. Now that we understand how the bow tie is structured and built, so let's look at where it's actually being used in the real world because this method isn't limited to just one sector. Starting with oil and gas industry, so this is where bow tie is most used. So companies like Shell, Total Energies, and our own national oil company Petronas, so mandates it for major hazard scenarios like gas blowouts, tank overflows, and H2S releases. In fact, Shell was one of the first organizations that formalized the method back in the 90s. In aviation, so ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, uses it to analyze runway incursions, mid-air collisions, and engine failures. So safety in aviation is non-negotiable, and the bow-tie method gives investigators and safety planners a structured way to map every possible failure pathway. So in the construction industry, so Malaysia's DOSH recognizes bow-tie in their guidelines. So scaffold collapses, crane lifts, and confined space entries. So these are exactly the kind of high consequence scenarios the method was designed for. So in the healthcare sector, hospitals use bow tie too. So for medication errors, infection control, and surgical mishaps. This helps clinical teams to see how a small procedural gap can escalate into a patient harm event. In power and utilities, they apply it to electrical faults, dam failures, and high pressure steam releases. And in the chemical and pharmaceutical space, for example, it is used to prevent events such as toxic spill, explosive and atmosphere, and contamination. The takeaway from here is versatility. So any industry where a single event can cause catastrophic harm can benefit from the bow tie analysis. So next we look at the strengths of the bow tie method. So we look at why the bow tie method has gained such a wide adoption. What makes it stand out from other risk assessment tools? Okay, so firstly, it is visual clarity. This is probably the biggest selling point. You can put a bow tie diagram in front of a senior manager and frontline worker or regulator, and all of them can understand it. So it doesn't require deep technical knowledge to read. So that's quite rare in a risk management tool. Secondly, comprehensive coverage. So unlike fault tree, which only looks at cause, or at event tree, which looks at consequences, bow tie shows both simultaneously. So you see the full picture in one place. So the left side shows how things go wrong, and the right side shows what happens if they do. Third, barrier accountability. So every single barrier on the diagram can be assigned to a specific person or team. So this is powerful because it moves safety from a general responsibility to an individual one. So someone owns each barrier, and that ownership can be tracked and audited. Fourth is scalability. So for a simple task like manual lifting, your bow tie might have 3 threads and 2 consequences. So for a major industrial hazard, it could span dozens of pathways. So this same framework scales to both. Fifth is regulatory compliance. So bow tie directly maps uh, to the requirements of ISO, OHSA, and DOSH guidelines. So when a regulator asks how do you manage this hazard, a bow tie is a very strong answer. And lastly, integration. So bow tie doesn't compete with HAZOP FMEA analysis. It actually uses them as inputs. So the outputs from these studies flow directly into the bow tie, so making it a unifying tool across the entire safety assessment process. Okay, next we look at the limitations of the bow tie method. So to give a balanced view, we need to talk about where bow tie method falls short, because no tool is perfect And understanding its limitations is just as important as knowing the strengths. So the first limitation is that it's a static snapshot. So a bow tie captures risk at a single point in time. So as your operation change, as new equipment is introduced or processes are modified, so the bow tie can become outdated. And an outdated risk assessment can create a false sense of security. So it needs regular review to stay relevant. Second, it's qualitative by nature. The standard bow tie doesn't give you numbers. It doesn't tell you that threat A has a 5% probability of occurring or that barrier B reduces risk by 80%. So for that level of quantification, you need the FMEA. So bow tie tells you what the barriers are, not how effective they are in quantitative terms. Third is oversimplification. A bow tie can make a complex system look more straightforward than it really is. So in reality, the barriers interact with each other. So one barrier failing can weaken another. So these cascading interdependencies can be missed if the diagram is kept too simple. Fourth, it's resource intensive. So building a thorough, accurate bow tie for a major hazard scenario takes time, expertise, and a proper facilitated workshop. So it's not a 5-minute exercise. So for organizations without dedicated safety teams, this can be a barrier for adoption. And lastly, barrier validity. The bow tie assumes that the barriers listed are actually working, but it cannot verify that. So you might document safety valves as a barrier, but if that valve hasn't been tested in 2 years, it may not actually function when needed. So the diagram is only as reliable as the barriers behind it. So the conclusion for this is the bow tie is a powerful tool, but it works best when kept current, reviewed regularly, and paired with other quantitative methods for high risk scenarios. Thank you. I will be handing over to my colleague for the next slide.
All right, next let's look at the integration with other safety assessment methods. So basically the bow tie method does not operate alone. It integrates with further information from several safety tools which we have listed up over here. So the first one is a fault tree analysis which works at the left side of the bow tie. So this is more towards to understand on the root causes of an incident. And the next one is the ETA, which is event tree analysis. So this is to look at what happens after the top event occurs. So this supports at the right side of the bow tie, showing the possible consequences and the recovery path that we need to take up. Hazard, which is the hazard and operability, identifies the deviations in process conditions such as pressure or temperature issues. So this deviation becomes a threat in the bow tie analysis. And the next one is the FMA, which is failure mode effect analysis, identifies the equipment failure modes. So the failures appear either as a threat or the barrier weakness in the bow tie itself. So last but not least is the risk matrix, which helps us to rank consequences by the severity and likelihood. So we know which bow tie pathway that we need to take a look and solve. So as a conclusion, bow tie acts as a central framework, pulling together insights from multiple safety tools. All right. Next, take a look at the conclusion or the key takeaways that we have come up from this bow tie analysis. So the first thing is the bow tie method gives us a clear visual overview of risk, linking root cause to consequences in one single diagram. And the next one is it is built on two key ideas, which is the prevention on the left side of the bow tie and the recovery or the mitigation that we need to take up on the right side of the bow tie. Next, barriers are the most important part of the bow tie. So if the barriers are weak, poorly maintained, or not monitored, overall safety performance will get dropped. And the next one is, although bow tie is mainly qualitative, it works very well with other methods like FTA, ETA, HAZARD, and FMEA, allowing a more deeper analysis to be conducted. And last but not least, it is used across industries such as oil and gas, aviation, healthcare, and construction. It proves that it's both practical and versatile. Right. Next, let's take a look at the contribution to workplace safety and risk management. So, this slide is more towards like bow tie method improves the real workplace safety, not only in terms of compliances. So, first thing is the proactive risk management. Bowtie helps us to identify hazards before the incident happens. So this allows the organization itself to be more on the proactive prevention instead of the reactive response. And the next one is the stronger safety culture. So because the barriers are very visible now, everyone understands what is their role in terms of safety. So this improves the ownership, engagement, accountability at all the levels. And next one is the better decision making. So managers right now they can clearly see which risks are most critical and allocate the resources more effectively. Doesn't matter it's time or manpower or even a budget that required, whichever that required the most that they need to put up. And last but not least, the legal and the regulatory protection. So documented border analysis show due diligence and systematic risk management, helping organizations to meet the OSHA, DOSH, and other regulatory requirements and standards. So overall, the Bowtie method supports safer operation, better decision, and long-term risk control. So with that, we also have attached all the references that we have taken up to perform this Bowtie method analysis. And that's all from our team. Thank you.